Hey there! You just caught me doing a little reading about some native reptiles and amphibians, and it reminded me, I'm glad that you're here because I've just been reminded that there's a little bit of a story I want to tell you guys. For some time now, I've wanted to tell you a story about a fascinating reptile. This is a reptile that may live right here in your very own backyard. And this story, like many do, begins 70 years in the past with a child. Our story begins with one George Rao Jr. Now, George's stepfather was a man named Fred Lazarus Jr., and Mr. Lazarus was one of the founders of the Lazarus Company. Now, the Lazarus Company is a parent company to something that you may know today as Macy's. Now, Mr. Lazarus took George, his mother, and the rest of their family on an awesome trip to Milan, Italy one year. They had a beautiful time. They come home, and George's mother has a mild shock. As they're unpacking from their wonderful vacation, George's mother finds a sock tucked away in one of the pockets of his suitcase. When she pulls it out, she is incredibly displeased to find that that sock is full of approximately 10 lizards. These unique lizards came from Milan. They were common, they lived everywhere, and George was just snatching them up and throwing them in a sock and brought them all the way across the Atlantic right back to Cincinnati, their home city. George's mother, of course, incredibly frustrated, and she tells him, dispose of the lizards immediately, find a way. So he takes the sock, he dumps the lizards out in his backyard, and George thinks very little of what's to come for those lizards, at least for now. After many decades, these lizards still find themselves surviving incredibly well in Hamilton County, the main county in Cincinnati. After 70 years of snow, sub-zero temperatures, and forced acclimatization to city life, how did these lizards survive? Well, thankfully, we have a handful of researchers that have been doing work over the last several years to kind of help us understand and gain a baseline perception of how this species of lizard has managed to anchor itself to Cincinnati so prolifically. George Rao Jr. himself can actually be thanked for some of our earliest understandings of how these lizards acclimated to Ohio. In 1989, he wrote a letter to the Cincinnati Museum of Natural History and its resident herpetologists explaining what he understood was taking place. And some 30 years later, scientists continue to do work that proves that Rao's theory may have been correct. Rao explained that these reptiles, the European wall lizard, were surviving in Cincinnati from only 3 unique origins of genetic code, meaning that only 3 of the lizards he brought to Ohio actually managed to breed with one another and lay eggs. Maybe that's 2 males with 1 female, or 1 male breeding with 2 females. Regardless, Cassandra Homan, a student, would later conduct research that proved Rao to be correct. A genetic bottlenecking event had taken place that was so prevalent, that was so strong to the population of these introduced European wall lizards, that any single specimen that you find on the streets of Cincinnati today has evidence for that genetic bottlenecking event in its code, meaning you can walk back through the history of every ancestor of that lizard and you can find that they all stem from one place. Other scientists, like Ohio Wesleyan University's Dr. Eric Gangloff, have been conducting research to determine how the introduction of the European wall lizard is affecting native ecosystems and comparable species of animal that fill the food chains in this county. Hamilton County is home to a couple species of native lizard. Namely, are 2 species of native skink that you can find out in any nature preserve or forested park. These are the broad-headed skink and the 5-line skink. These are awesome reptiles that I love getting a chance to run into, and they both depend on diverse forested areas or grassland areas that are rich with bugs and don't contain too many predators. However, the fact of the matter is that if you were to take a walk in the city, somewhere near the University of Cincinnati or downtown, you're not seeing a skink anywhere. Absolutely not. But what you are probably going to see are several European wall lizards. While my understanding is that no official label has been given to this situation, here is how I understand the introduction of the European wall lizard to affect the native ecosystem. Typically, this sort of event can lead to a population quickly spreading over an ecosystem because nothing there has evolved to keep their numbers in check. This a population of organisms may have no natural predators in that area, or they may simply have an advantage over native species that allows them to dominate. We call these organisms invasive species, and as is the case with the colloquially coined Lazarus lizards, they're typically the result of human introduction. Famous examples of invasive species range significantly. Famous examples of these organisms include the cane toad, a large amphibian from Central and South America that was introduced to Australia to help control pests in cane fields. Now, these amphibians ended up not eating those invertebrates that the farmers were trying to get rid of, but instead they ended up eating everything else. They wreaked havoc on local populations of invertebrates, mammals, reptiles, birds, amphibians. They were eating everything, and now you'd be hard-pressed to take a trip to some parts of Australia and not find a cane toad. Invasive species can be plants, too. Take a look at one right here in America, the honeysuckle. Honeysuckle is incredibly prevalent, but incredibly invasive. This plant is from Europe and Asia, and it is very difficult to remove. It ends up blooming and sprouting its leaves before anything else in the forest does in the spring. So it has a lot more time to leaf out, to spread its wings, and to start absorbing sun and getting bigger and bigger. Meanwhile, it slowly starts to suffocate all the native plants on the forest floor. If you don't remove honeysuckle entirely from the soil, you are probably going to continue to see it in your backyard. Add on top of that the fact that native plants already have to compete in forested areas with the large trees that are gathering all the sunlight at the top of the forest. Honeysuckle really does a number on native populations. It grows incredibly fast as a result of its leaves blooming before anyone else in the forest, and it can snuff out and starve an entire forest floor very quickly. However, the native species of lizard here in Cincinnati, like the broad-headed skink or the five-lined skink, do not appear to be too negatively affected at this time by the Lazarus lizard's presence. In my opinion, this has everything to do with the niche that the European wall lizard fills here in Cincinnati compared to those native skinks. One of the biggest reasons that the European wall lizard was able to acclimatize so well to Cincinnati is because Milan and southern Ohio actually have incredibly similar climate. For most of the year, Cincinnati is very warm and has a lot of spaces for these lizards to proliferate. They were introduced to an urban environment, which is not so different than the one that they were from, and it's chock full of little habitats and prey for these animals to feed on. So it's no shock to me at all that the European wall lizard was able to do so well for that reason alone. Cincinnati is covered in tons of steep hills and valleys. The architecture is 150 to 200 years old in some places, and there are dozens of manicured green spaces littered all over the city. The streets and buildings here are littered with nooks and crannies that are perfect places to hide. They are perfect places to find the insects and invertebrates that are attracted to human spaces, and they're also a great place to hunker down and hide and brumate over the course of the wintertime. As I said, the native lizards just don't thrive in urban environments. They need the peace and quiet of a forested ecosystem, and they're larger on average than the European wall lizard is, so they don't do so well just living in a crack at the bottom of your apartment building. So, in the spaces that they occupy, the European wall lizard doesn't necessarily have direct reptilian competition, but they do have predators. Birds, stray cats, small mammals like raccoons or possums. They would love to find a nice juicy European wall lizard whenever they're turning a corner. All of these animals, as a matter of fact, prey on the wall lizard, and I wouldn't be shocked if even something like large invertebrates, maybe a spider or a praying mantis, would be something that would snack on the young of the Lazarus lizard. If you want to check this out, I actually found a baby wall lizard sitting in my Tupperware just a few days ago. That was really awesome. But if you take a look at this guy, he is very tiny. He would have made for a very easy snack for a wide variety of other organisms that live here in the area. So, let me get this straight. If the Lazarus lizards don't necessarily affect the populations of the native lizards, they have predators, and they seem to have filled an empty niche, are they invasive at all? Well, when a population of animals makes their way into a new ecosystem after being introduced, and they manage to persist there, but they don't destabilize the food chain as a whole, well, then we have a new term for these organisms, something we call naturalized species. The term naturalized species can be really hard to use concretely. So to see if that's actually what's going on here, let's take a look at the definition between invasive species and naturalized species and compare them. First of all, invasive species have the tendency to spread very aggressively across a landmass, like the honeysuckle or the cane toad. Naturalized species could spread across a landmass, but they simply don't for one biological or abiotic reason or another. Like, for example, how Lazarus lizards are mostly only found in Hamilton County. Additionally, invasive species cause ecological and economic harm to whatever part of the world they were introduced to, and they require the work of humans to help manage their numbers and keep them from destroying ecosystems. While, on the other hand, naturalized species require no work on humans' behalf at all to keep their numbers managed. Finally, naturalized species actually have the ability to integrate themselves into an ecosystem and provide something for the greater good. They play a role in the grander scheme of the system they are a part of. While the Lazarus lizards do provide food to native animals, and they also eat some of the bugs and pests that live around our buildings, Dr. Gangloff over at Ohio Wesleyan and his team are starting to theorize that the Lazarus lizards may actually keep residents of Hamilton County protected from a nasty disease. There is a good chance that the Lazarus lizards eat so many of the local ticks in the area, residents of Hamilton County may actually have a lower chance of ever contracting Lyme disease from those little parasitic arachnids that we all hate so much. However, it's not impossible for a naturalized population to quickly turn into an invasive population, and there's a chance that this could happen with the Lazarus lizard one day. According to my research here, Lazarus lizards have been found in Butler and Claremont County at this time, according to the ODNR. Also, neighboring departments of natural resources have confirmed sightings of the European wall lizard in both Indiana and Kentucky. Studies are also showing that the Lazarus lizard is growing. On average, specimens of this species are getting bigger. And I gotta be honest, I feel like I've noticed this. When I was a kid, I came to the Cincinnati Zoo and I saw these lizards crawling around the flower beds and stuff, and I couldn't believe that I was seeing wild lizards running around like I was in Florida, but I was just an hour away from home. And I swear the lizards that I see today are probably double, triple the size of the wall lizard that I typically saw 15 years ago. The possible effect of these lizards getting larger and having more established populations all over the area in several different states could have effects that we don't know the outcome of. If they start making their way into more naturalized habitats where the broad-headed skink, the five-line skink, and other native Ohio lizards make their home, there could be some nasty consequences. These lizards are just a slightly recent example of something that we as humans have been doing for millennia, as we mastered the ability to travel from continent to continent, and we started to play with the different aspects of the very ecosystems that we came from. We've been putting plants and animals in places that they don't belong, sometimes on purpose and sometimes totally by accident, for a very long time now. In the case of the European wall lizard, while it's a rather endearing story of how they got here, that one sock full of lizards could seriously lead to ecological troubles someday down the line. At this point in time, though, I don't mind their presence, of course. I mean, I think it's awesome that I get to step outside this far north in the USA and see lizards running around like they're anoles that you would find down south. So it's really, really charming. I could just take a walk to my classes and I'll end up seeing several of these lizards from the spring to the fall. I hope that we only continue to learn great things about what these lizards do for the native ecosystem. And let's face it, populations, ecosystems, species, they change. Whether it's by human design or simply the will of Mother Nature, I just think it's really fascinating to see how the playbook of ecology changes so often on this planet. And this is a really awesome example that I get to look at almost every day. So I hope you learned something today. I hope you found this fascinating, and maybe at some point in the future you can visit the Queen City and come find some European wall lizards yourself. So with that being said, I have been the Collegiate Creature Keeper, and I'll catch you next time. See you later. Deuces.